Welcome to the Piping Show, coming to you from the National Piping Centre in Scotland. My name's Ailis Sutherland and I'm your host for today, and we'll be chatting to our guest Ian McInnis, a prolific piper and broadcaster at BBC Radio Scotland's Pipeline. He was the producer of the programme for 30 years and was part of the team that sent out over 1,000 episodes. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the National Piping Centre's YouTube channel. You'll receive updates from the Piping Live Festival as well as future episodes of the Piping Show. It really helps us to reach as many people as possible, so thanks for doing that. We're really looking forward to bringing you our interview with Iain Macinnes later in the show, but for now let's take a look at this week's news in piping.
This week, the National Youth Pipe Band of Scotland have announced 9 trainee tutor positions. They are available for anybody aged under 25 or under 30 if you identify as disabled. You can find out more about this paid opportunity at www.nypbs.co.uk. Last Saturday saw the Scottish Pipe Band Championships in Dumbarton. The Grade 1 event was won overall by Field Marshal Montgomery, and Inveraray District won the drumming. The Glengarry Highland Games took place in Maxville in Canada, and their pipe band event was won overall by the 78th Fraser Highlanders. Today and tomorrow, the Sky Gathering takes place in Portree. This is followed by the Silver Chanter, which is the first event of Piping Live this year, which takes place in Solmorostig in Slate. You can find out more about this event and get tickets at www.pipinglive.co.uk. Then next week, Piping Live takes over the National Piping Centre with events throughout the week, including concerts, recitals, Learn At Live workshops, and so much more across the week. You can find out more at the website I've just mentioned. Just to let you know, there'll be no piping show next week, but tune in for updates across the week from Piping Live. I've been Helen Urquhart for the Piping Show.
Now, as you know, the piping world is full of history, and to give us this week's piping history lesson, here's Dr. Andrew Bova.
Hello everyone. Today we have for you a fascinating and rare bit of pipe band history. This pipe chanter belonged to Chris Sutherland, who was a pipe major of Bowhill Colliery Pipe Band, and Bowhill Colliery was the first band to win the World Pipe Band Championships, as it's now known, in 1947. The Worlds have gone back to 1906, but in 1947 the Scottish Pipe Band Association, hadn't yet become the Royal Scottish Pipe Band Association, decided to start its own Worlds event that would be a dedicated World Championship, and Bowhill Colliery was the first band to win. There's a rich history of colliery bands in Scotland, and for our viewers who maybe haven't heard that term before, colliery refers to coal mines. So there's a rich history of colliery bands in Scotland, with many coal mines in the Central Belt sponsoring pipe bands. Bands like Shotts and Dykehead Caledonia, Dysart and Dundonald, Stonehouse Pipe Band, Alloa Colliery, Colburn IOR, all bands that were sponsored by collieries. As a matter of fact, the RSPBA used to host a dedicated competition open only to colliery bands. Now, this chanter was not the chanter that Chris Sutherland played when they won the World Pipe Band Championships, but rather was a custom chanter made for him in 1959. Chris Sutherland worked in the Bowhill Colliery, and unfortunately was a victim of a coal mining accident where a bit of debris fell from the roof and crushed his right index finger, or as we would call it, our D finger. Unfortunately, it had to be amputated. Now, that is an obvious major issue for anybody who wants to play the bagpipe. But he was friends with Bob Hardy, who was the pipe major of Muirhead and Sons Pipe Band, and also the owner of R.G. Hardy Bagpipes. And Bob Hardy took to the task of making a pipe chanter that Chris could play. So if we look at the front of the chanter here, you'll notice that the D hole is missing. But if we turn it around, we can see the D hole is on the back. And so Chris would have played the D with his thumb. An ingenious way to overcome adversity and allow one of history's most important pipe majors to continue making music.
If you've ever been to the Piping Centre, you may have seen a certain character sneaking around. That's right, it's our very own Chanter McDuck. And the Piping Centre is not the only place he can be found. He's a keen traveller and can be in any corner of the world. Let's find out where he is this week. It's time to bring you this week's interview with our guest, Iain McInnis, who needs no real introduction. However, I will tell you that he was producer of BBC Radio Scotland's Pipeline for 30 years, and in his time produced more than 1,000 episodes for the programme. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Iain McInnis. Iain, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about behind the scenes in your job at the BBC, and also about your kind of path in life as well, as a musician and as a broadcaster. And so I thought maybe it would be nice to start nearer to the beginning of your piping career, and if you could just tell us a little bit about how you initially got into it. I believe you were taught at school, is that right?
That's right, Ailis, and nice to be here incidentally, and congratulations on starting a new thing up, a new broadcasting venture. Yes, my family was from Lewis actually, but when I was born, I'm older brother, my parents were living overseas in Borneo, Brunei, North Borneo. My dad was director of education out there. So we came back to school in the UK. In fact, I learnt my piping, first of all, at a small school near Huntly, though the family has no connection with Huntly in particular. A guy called Colin Forsyth used to come out from the Huntly Pipe Band and teach us. And then I was at Glenalmond College in Perthshire, and we were very lucky in that Jimmy McGregor, the famous pipe major Jimmy McGregor, actually worked at the college, and he ran the school pipe band, so he sort of gave us tips and lessons, and Jimmy being a larger than life character, he gave us some good life skills as well, I think. So he was great. That was Jimmy McGregor.
Oh, excellent. And were you aware at the time of his stature?
Yes, I was, because remarkably, he was still competing, Jimmy, and he was in his 60s. I think he won the Inverness Gold Medal, in fact, when he was into his 60s, maybe even his mid-60s. So we could hear him practicing, he used to go to one of the sporting pavilions and practice off a summer evening, and we'd go out and have a wee listen to him. And of course, like all people of that generation, my own parents, my own father, they'd been caught up in the Second World War, and their own lives had been, in a sense, delayed taking off. They were in the army for 5, 6, 7 years, a lot of these people. And Jimmy, he probably didn't get into competing particularly seriously till he was, out of the army and into civilian life, working at Balmoral. He was one of that great team of pipers with Bob Brown and Bob Nichol. Jimmy himself, I think his brother was there as well, who might have been called Ian. Okay. He may not have been, but that name just sprang to mind. And
so was your kind of initial upbringing in piping more of a formal Highland Pipes competition style of repertoire, or was there a little bit more influence from other genres? Yeah, well, yes, I would say competition style without necessarily a lot of competing. I never did much competing, and certainly as an adult I didn't. But Jimmy was teaching the tunes in a style, I suppose, that would have been of great value to a competitor. But his own style of playing, a lot of players of that generation, him and Ian Morrison and others, Angus John McClellan, post-war, they were playing, I would say, a slightly different style, particularly of march playing, than what we hear nowadays on the competition platform. They're playing they're quite vigorous, brisk, a bit faster. Jimmy had a style when he was competing. He, instead of going up and down the boards, he'd go in a kind of circle, a circular pattern, and he would stride out. He had big feet. And he was a big man, actually, and he looked very military. So it's quite robust, his style of playing. When he was teaching marches, he liked to emphasise the offbeat, so he'd kind of get you playing on the right foot rather than the left foot. Oh. So there was, I would say, a bit of subtlety there that we were very lucky to be getting as school kids at the time. And so, once you left school, was it obvious to you that like a career in music or something to do with music was going to be the next step, or what were your plans when you left school?
No, well, it wasn't obvious to me at all, and in fact that wasn't ever a plan. I went to Edinburgh University, did a geography degree initially, and then I went on to the School of Scottish Studies and did some research into piping history as it happened. I was kind of looking from the 1780s to the 1840s, which was an interesting transition period in terms of what was happening to the Highland bagpipe, competitions starting up, pipe makers making fancy new instruments, not unlike this rather nice specimen that you've got sitting here. And the music, that sort of came about. I just loved hearing bands like the Bothy Band and Planxty and Jedannan, the big Irish folk groups, but also hearing the early Scottish folk groups who were incorporating pipes, Battlefield Band, Ossian with Ian McDonald. And that was kind of my incentive to get into it myself.
I suppose in Edinburgh at that time, it would have been the perfect place for a piper who'd moved to the city to kind of fall into a career in music. I know quite a few people of your generation who ended up doing that, and I suppose maybe blaze a bit of a trail for people nowadays that's become absolutely the norm, that you can consider that from, I don't know, the age of 15, 16, and there's a clear path now. So, well,
that is a difference, I would say, Ailish, between my generation and my time and your generation. There's now an educational structure for bringing people through into piping, and indeed all sorts of folk music, every sort of folk music in Scotland. And that didn't exist back in the late 70s and the early 80s. And it really took a lot of effort to get places like this, this great organisation here, the old College of Piping, and other really nice courses like the one down in Newcastle, the one you did yourself up at Benbecla at UHI. So these have all evolved, and let's not forget the Centre of Excellence up at Plockton, for secondary school level students. So all the people who've kind of created the infrastructure, they deserve a big pat on the back. And certainly when I was university age, your options in music were doing classical music at an higher educational level, or there were some jazz courses, and neither of them were areas I had any knowledge of. So there's a lot of self-teaching, I think. Actually, you just had to get out there and do it yourself.
I suppose, though, for the people who did have to do that, as a piper trying to understand music theory, for example, or how to put a chord progression together to go along with some pipe tunes, sometimes working stuff out for yourself can come back with some really interesting knowledge that maybe you couldn't have been taught in that way. And I think that a lot of the people who are teaching on these courses now, or who have taught, that has definitely been their kind of path. And so you're melding this kind of like modern approach to pipers actually being taught about these things formally and understanding them, as well as having someone who actually has walked the road. And so I think that's a really nice kind of combination of things. And I wonder...
Yes. I totally agree with you there, Aisha. I just have to agree with you. Working out yourself is important, but actually I would say in my own musical education I have huge gaps in, particularly when it comes to chord structures and things like that. And you can see how that knowledge has fed through into, say, listening to modern day pipe bands, the good pipe bands here, Inveraray and District and Field Marshal Montgomery. The harmonies they're putting into slow airs and things are really very sophisticated, and they work. And certainly, back in the day, that there was very little. In fact, there were very few harmonies played by pipe bands, for instance, and what were pretty basic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those like Inveraray slow air harmonies and some of their arrangements, beautiful. The outro to the medley sets. I think there's a whole team behind coming up with those kind of arrangements. And I think maybe nowadays there's more influence from within the band of, you know, people submitting a tune or coming up with an arrangement for something, that it's maybe more of a team effort. It's maybe that everyone in the band has a much more of a rounded understanding of how music works, and it's not just that you've been taught this tune and that's how you play it. And of course with radio and internet and everything, people have way more access to the whole world of music, so it's no surprise that although perhaps maybe the regional styles have maybe become a little bit more homogenized, people can develop their own styles, and so that's quite good from a sort of like producer's angle, where you're looking for things that are different, and you can put together a program of lots of different styles and approaches. And so I wonder, how did it come about that you started being the producer at Pipeline?
Now that came about, I was at the School of Scottish Studies, and my supervisor there was doing a research degree. My supervisor there was a chap called Peter Cook. A previous student of his was Hugh MacDonald, who was working at the BBC, and Hugh was just wanting someone to do sort of small packages and things for the then current piping programmes. I think the term pipeline hadn't even been coined back in those days. It was so long ago. We used to have two programmes, one with a fairly straightforward name. It was called Music for the Pipes, so I think you could work out what was going to be on those programmes. And the other one was called Pipes and Drums. So we used to take it week about a bit of, and they were short programmes, they were about 25 minutes. And that was the world I sort of landed in, working in the music department. Not just making piping programmes, but other programmes as well. But certainly one sort of weekly commitment was make the piping programme. And gradually we managed to get it slightly longer. It went to 45 minutes and then went up to nearly an hour. And we were able to expand the sort of content, just what you were talking about a minute ago, at a good time, at a time when pipers themselves were kind of breaking out of, not exactly shackles, but there was a more positive mood to particularly people playing Highland pipes who wanted to experiment with doing things that were slightly unconventional. So we have your Martin Bennetts and your Gordon Duncans and all the lovely pipers playing in folk groups. Just trying to do different stuff with the pipes and trying to work out ways where you could do something that was both good and tasteful, and it didn't always work, of course, but so as a program, I would say we were in a position to encourage that sort of thing to happen, and to reflect it happening, while always, I always felt it was important to represent the core tradition really strongly. So solo Highland piping, of course, so many great players who make a musical career competing, and pipe bands as well as we could also.
And you talked a little bit about your studies at at Edinburgh University, and how you looked particularly at some of the changes that had happened before your time. And so I wondered if you could maybe talk through some of the changes you've seen in your time as well, and just what are the changes and what things have maybe stayed the same?
Well, I suppose in my time I would probably say that's the last 40 years, 45 years, and there have been changes. I mean, we've sort of touched on the educational side of piping and drumming and how that's changed. We perhaps haven't mentioned how important the people going into schools are. There's always been people teaching in schools, but the last 10 years, I think, with the Scottish Schools Pipes and Drums Trust, providing a comfort blanket and indeed just providing finance to cover good teachers going to schools, providing careers for these teachers, and many of them are making a very good living out of it and doing a great job. So that's one side of things. Pipe bands, I would say they've become, they've become bigger, a lot bigger.
For sure.
At the top level. They are more sophisticated, I think, musically, without a doubt. We've maybe, you've played in top-class pipe bands yourself, Ailis, and maybe we have come to a point where we need to just look at other things the top-grade bands can do in competition. They're doing great stuff in concert, but maybe just expanding the approach to competing with medley selections. I'm finding slightly, I've been to 2 of the big championships this year and listened to the Grade 1 bands. My interest is sustained very well for 5 minutes in what they're doing, but I often sort of drift off a bit, and I think that's because there's a sort of uniformity to approach to it. I think if you're sitting within a band, you're very aware of all the subtleties that are going on around you, but if you're looking in from outside, actually it's kind of the same thing happening, the breaks, harmonization, the subtle cross rhythms and so on from the percussion. So maybe we just need to look at doing what the Breton pipe bands do and breaking it down to small, allow the drummers to do a bit, take it down to a quartet here and a mini band there, and build up a larger piece of music, a suite of some sort. One thing I would say though, you'd have to provide a really adequate space for that to happen in. I don't think it can happen in a park, on Costa del Clyde in a gale, with the rain coming in horizontally. You've got to put these bands, if they're going to do that sort of thing, in a good space. Outdoors, certainly, if you want. In fact, I prefer pipe bands outdoors. I think the instrumentation suits outdoors better. Anyway, that was just a passing thought. Other things that have changed. One thing I'd like to mention, I'm interested in it, I know you're very interested in it, is bellows pipes. Certainly 40 years ago, late 70s, you couldn't get a set of bellows pipes in Scotland. They didn't exist. If you wanted to play bellows pipes, you had to buy a set of Uilleann pipes or a set of Northumbrian pipes. So we've had a revival in that tradition, or perhaps better to say a reinvention, because they are bellows pipes, but they're not the same bellows pipes that were being played back in the 17th and 18th centuries. We're now playing long chanters that make an easy transition from Highland pipes. But that's a good thing, and all respect to the pipe makers who've really done a great job in a pretty short space of time in making really high quality instruments. And maybe a final thing I would mention in terms of changes, and we have touched on it, just the fact that players are willing to embrace so many different things, So you as a player, you can play in a top-class pipe band, you can, if you wanted to, go and be a top-class soloist, but you can also have your own trio or folk group, and you can also go and play with, at the Edinburgh Military Tattoo or whatever, so people, there are options, and good players are taking these options and picking up on them.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for chatting to us. It's been great to get your perspective and your retrospect as well.
Well, my pleasure, and really wish you well with this. And you're going to be very busy the next while if you're putting out a programme every week.
Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of The Piping Show. I've been your host, Ailis Sutherland. Please do remember to like and subscribe to the National Piping Centre's YouTube channel for future episodes and content. I'll now play out with a tune of the week, which is Pipe Major Charles Timmers. Bye for now.